So we're ready to start to talk about school schedules. And again, we're going to look at our kiddos anytime from about age 3 all the way through high school, and how we create those rhythms and patterns where they move back and forth between each home. We're going to keep in mind that this is the river, this is the underlying rhythm to our children's lives that may build in tiers, again, that may change over developmental stages as time goes on.
Right. And we also want to keep in mind the legal implications as we are drafting and considering the different scenarios for each of these families, and understanding that there are a myriad of parenting plan forms adopted by every different state. So in other words, we don't have one uniform parenting plan for every state. And this again is where the viewer wants to make sure that you check within your own jurisdiction, get some legal advice on what form that you are using in particular. And for example, what you and I are trying to create is the sense of co-parents being able to take whatever form they have to put their schedule into, adopting the particular schedule that they want for themselves and their family outside of those forms, and yet somehow being able to capture that within the form so they can get that signed by the court and get that approved.
Right. And this is a good reason why you might want to touch base with an attorney before you even try and submit your form.
Absolutely.
As well as getting the legal vetting of a parenting plan document, period. So let's start with 100% parents on duty at different times. And we remember that what we want for kids is a strong and engaged relationship with each parent. We also want children to have the support they need for homework, for extracurricular activities. We want to maximize parent time. So those are kind of our backstops for how we think about this. What we've learned from the research is that the more balanced time is for children with both of their parents, actually the better children do. We call that a shared parenting schedule.
Now, Karen, can I interrupt for 1 minute and ask you, does shared only mean 50-50? What does that mean to you?
No. Shared could be 50-50, but it could also it could be 30-35% and whatever the other math is on that. It's what it means is it's enough time.
Right.
So it's at least 4, but more typically 5, 6, or 7 overnights with each parent, structured in such a way that kids get their needs met and are with their sibling group and get their homework done, like I said, and get to their activities, but mostly feel at home and in relationship with both of their parents. That's a shared parenting schedule.
There are several factors that make a shared parenting schedule more successful than not, if you put that in respect to what you're looking at with developing your schedule. So one of those is obviously consistency for the children. Another would be a reduction of the conflict between the parents.
Correct.
Another is predictability for the children with respect to the schedule. Every kid knows where they're going to be when.
Right.
Good communication between parents and between the children as well too. So everybody again knows where they're going to be and when and what different roles are going to be. And we look at geographic proximity as well, because I certainly have had clients come in and think they can do a more shared parenting plan, and yet somebody's living 30 miles away or in a different school district.
Right.
So do you want to speak to that?
Right. Again, we're looking at what's practical. We're not going to get children up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get commuted to their school that doesn't start until 7:30. That makes no sense. That's not what's best for kids. At the same time, we want to make sure that that child, if that parent does need to live 30 miles away, doesn't lose contact with that parent and doesn't lose engagement. So we might be looking at how to expand more time on school breaks or longer weekends or Monday holidays. We might be looking at all kinds of ways to scaffold that situation so that overall children have good amounts of healthy time with each parent. That's what we want to think about. Remember, your children are not a commodity to be split in half or somehow this defines whether I'm a good parent or not. Sometimes what defines a good parent is my willingness to let go, my willingness to say, this will be best for my kids. That can define an excellent parent who stays child-centered.
And no matter what schedule you end up developing, cooperation and communication are key.
Cooperation, communication, child-centered. Now, there are times when we have a primary residential schedule, and let's just talk about that different. Shared residential schedule, primary residential schedule. And a primary residential schedule is when one parent really does only see a child for a very limited period of time. And the child's experience is that they have one primary home. And that can be a different kind of schedule. It can meet the needs of particular kinds of families. And if we have a parent who's traveling 2 or 3 weeks a month for work, we are not going to take anything away from that. Maybe it's a service member who's gone for long deployments. So it's not that that's bad or good. It's that does this, one, need to meet the needs of your family, and how do we make sure, even in the face of those differences, that kids get the best of each parent?
And I think, again, language sometimes comes into play when parents are talking about whether or not they want to agree to naming one parent as the primary residential parent. We want to reinforce that that does not take away from the 100% parenting role of each parent. It's just a legal definition by virtue of the fact that maybe we have a residential schedule that for one of those parents is less than the 30 or 35% of the overall month that you're talking about. And again, sometimes it's special circumstances that apply with respect to whether there are actually statutory enforced restrictions in families where we have substance abuse or domestic violence or a criminal background.
Areas that need to be healed in the family.
Right.
That it may be temporary, but it still may be important that there is a primary residential schedule until a situation is resolved. And then once it's resolved, we might be able to move to a more shared schedule.
Excellent point. And then, of course, we have primary residential parents where you're speaking of when we have people with unique careers. And so their schedule does not necessarily allow them to have more time than perhaps 1 or 2 days a week or every other week. And so, again, that does not detract from their role as a 100% parent. It's merely a scheduling issue.
Correct.
And if you could for a minute talk about another point that I think is important, and that is not keeping track, right?
What do you mean, counting hours and counting
Right,
overnights?
right.
You know, I'm going to go back to at this point, it all feels like a loss. It's really easy to get into counting hours, counting overnights. And as things adjust in this next couple of years, what people are going to find is that there's plenty of time. And this idea that there's a lot of opportunities where our children are out in the world, where we're both going to be involved. We're both going to be courtside. We're both going to be at that music concert. We're both going to be at that play that our child is starring in. And in that way, we're both engaged in their lives. So we don't want to get into a competitive counting situation where we're fighting over time with our children. Our children feel bad when we fight over time about them because all they care about is to be loved and taken care of and to have access to both of us.
And I think that leads us to another point, which is what's often termed right of first refusal. And that would be if you're on duty and it's your time to have the children, and yet you find yourself in a circumstance where you need some sort of child care. What do you think is important for our viewers to know about allowing that other parent access during the time that would otherwise be your scheduled time?
This is similar to what we were talking about earlier, that if I'm a school teacher and you're working till 6, is there any reason the kids aren't with me until you get done with work? And there's no reason, especially if I'm supportive of your household and we have good communication. And our children just know that's the rhythm. I'm with my dad until my mom gets home, or whatever the case may be. Well, right of first refusal, when we are good co-parents, we do it anyway. We do what's right, okay? If I need to be in a conference all day Saturday on my weekend, you're going to be the first person I call. If we're getting along, of course I want the kids to be with you. If you're available, I don't assume you are, but I'm going to ask. On the other hand, if we're fighting and everything is ugly between us and I am forced to call you, I am going to figure out how to chunk that all-day time on Saturday so that it never hits some threshold that I have to call you. So it becomes a source of game playing. I really say to parents, please don't use right of first refusal. Do what's right. Don't codify it. Now, I might say, if I'm going to be out of town for an overnight, then I'll call you and I'll put that in the parenting plan. If either parent is called out of town for work for an overnight, the other parent will be offered that residential time. Sure, that's fine, but what if grandma's coming to town? What if my sister's here? So there are a lot of ways that we want to be aware that a right of first refusal can become an area of fighting rather than a secure place for kids. We have grandparents, we have best friends. What if Madeline wants to go on a sleepover? There's not a
Right.
problem, right?
Right.
So do what's right and be careful about codifying that for your kids.
And I think really we couch that in terms of flexibility. How
Correct.
much flexibility can you exercise with the other parent, along with the cooperative nature of your relationship that you're hopefully developing, and rebuilding some trust, because flexibility needs trust as a foundation.
Right.
But the more flexible that you can be with one another, it's going to benefit not only the both of you, but it's also especially going to benefit your children.
If I'm not withholding the kids as a form of punishment, that's the key, right? But if I'm going out on a Saturday night, I'm not going out until 8, and the kids would love to have Mackenzie babysit them and get tucked in and they're going to be there on Sunday morning, guess what? I don't want to call you and offer you the kids because I'm going out on a date. That doesn't make any sense for me, for you, or for the kids.
Right.
So being aware of all those different elements of family life are going to roll forward. You're only doing a parenting plan now, but it's for the next how many years that you're sharing children together.
So we've really been talking about the concepts to consider when you start looking at your schedule, and short of going into details of how the schedules can be drafted in this video, we want to be able to introduce the viewers to the workbook pages.
Right.
Right. Do you want to speak about those workbook pages?
Well, other than this is a great time to turn to the workbook. They're going to find journal pages and a workbook page to talk about that river that's going to underlie their children's lives, that residential schedule that sets in motion that rhythm.
Right. So in our next segment then, getting away from the specific residential schedule, we're going to be talking about the all-important summer breaks,
School breaks.
holidays, and special occasions.
That's right.
Okay.